So my recording was cut because my laptop died, and we're still this is still week 3, part 3, but now with letter B, only because my lecture was cut short because my laptop died. So apologies for that, and hindi ko ba alam. I think it's time to change the laptop. But my God, this is a very expensive thing to do at this point. Mukhang magkaka-psychological crisis ako. O I will just treat it as a mystical event. May ganun. Apply the lesson agad. So, I'm downloading the first one, and the first lecture will last about an hour. That is week 3, part 3, letter A, no? And this is letter B, and I will begin specifically with the slide where I was cut, and there's still more or less 10 slides left, and hopefully I can explain this one in less than 30 minutes so that you do not also, in a way, you do not kill me, or I hope you don't kill me. Uh, Precisely because of this. So we were looking at mystical experience, and we were trying to clarify mystical experience before the entire lecture just broke down. No? And for that, I apologize and ask for your apology also, because nga putol yung slide. So we were looking at mystical experiences before we went on break, or well, before I was forced to go on break, when supposedly I should be pre-recording continuously. Nevertheless, there are reasons to everything. Hayon in-apply agad yung natutunan. And it's okay actually. So, so we were saying mystical experiences have criteria in the church. And the first criteria is, in fact, doctrinal consistency. When we talk about doctrinal consistency in the church, we need to ask ourselves, does this agree with Christian revelation? God does not contradict himself. And therefore, authentic mystical experiences deepen the truths already revealed in Christ. Second is moral fruit. What kinds of person emerges afterward? Does the experience produce humility, charity, greater love, greater responsibility? Or does it produce pride and self-importance? Jesus himself taught, "You will know them by their fruits." Third, functional stability. Does the experience integrate the person's life, or does it create chaos? Authentic spirituality generally makes people more capable of loving, working, and relating to others. It grounds life rather than destroying it. Fourth, accountability. I have to minimize this one. Accountability, because authentic mystics accept correction and they remain within the communion of the church. They seek spiritual direction, and therefore false mysticism often rejects accountability. It insists, "I no longer need anyone." Therefore, we conclude with a very important insight below. The intensity of an experience does not prove its authenticity. Its lasting fruits matter more than its dramatic character. So sometimes both clinical assessment and spiritual direction are necessary, and these disciplines complement rather than oppose each other. Let's look at religious experience and psychopathology. How do we distinguish genuine religious experience from mental illness? There's actually no simple checklist. Many phenomena overlap. For example, hearing voices, seeing visions, ecstatic states, profound certainty, dramatic behavioral change. Those experiences may occur in authentic religious life. They may also occur in psychiatric disorders. Therefore, neither automatic acceptance nor automatic dismissal is appropriate. We need to be warned against two opposite mistakes. The first is reductionism. Some assume that every mystical experience is simply psychosis. This dismisses centuries of authentic spiritual testimony. The second mistake is naive spiritualization. Some assume every unusual experience must come from God. This ignores genuine psychiatric illness. Both errors are dangerous. Instead, careful discernment is required. Psychologists examine cognition, affect behavior, functioning, and history. Pastoral ministers examine doctrine, spiritual fruits, humility, charity, and ecclesial communion. These perspectives complement one another. Finally, there's another absolute principle. If an experience commands a person to harm oneself or others, immediately professional intervention is required. Safety takes priority. Neither spiritual interpretation nor theological speculation should delay urgent psychiatric care. This illustrates one of the central themes of the entire course. Psychology and theology are not enemies. In fact, psychology helps us understand the human experience of religion, and theology helps us discern its supernatural meaning. Together, they actually serve the flourishing of persons. We now reach this point where we are confronted with one of the most practical questions in the entire psychology of religion. Throughout this course, we have examined prayer, conversion, mystical experience, religious coping, psychopathology, and pastoral care. The natural question becomes, how do we know whether a religious experience is healthy? This is the task of discernment. Discernment is different from skepticism. It does not begin by assuming every extraordinary experience is false, nor does it begin by assuming every experience comes directly from God. Discernment is the disciplined process of asking wise questions before reaching conclusions. The first question concerns cultural and religious context. Every authentic religious experience is interpreted within a tradition. A Catholic speaks of grace, sacraments, saints, and the Holy Spirit. A Buddhist may describe awakening or mindfulness. A Muslim may speak of surrender to Allah. Psychology recognizes that experiences are always interpreted through the language, symbols, and practices available to the individual. Therefore, it asks, is this experience intelligible within the person's religious tradition? Suppose someone claims that the Blessed Virgin instructed him to reject the Eucharist. Such an experience would immediately raise theological concerns because it contradicts Christian doctrine. Authentic religious experiences ordinarily deepen rather than contradict the faith community from which they arise. The second criteria The second criteria is functional impact. One of the clearest psychological indicators of pathology is impairment. So we ask, does the experience prevent the person from working? Has the person stopped sleeping? Has the relationship collapsed? Has judgment become impaired? Or is the individual placing himself in danger? Notice that psychology is less concerned with whether an experience is supernatural than with what it does to human functioning. A visionary who becomes incapable of eating, sleeping, or caring for others requires careful evaluation regardless of how compelling the experience appears. Third is coherence and flexibility. Healthy persons are capable of reflecting upon their own experiences. They can ask, perhaps I misunderstood. They remain teachable. Pathological certainty often refuses all questioning. The psychologically healthy believer can tolerate ambiguity, genuine humility, always leaving room for discernment. Finally, it comes what Christianity has traditionally emphasized: moral fruit. Jesus himself gave this criterion: you will know them by their fruits. The central question is not, did you have an extraordinary experience? The question is, who you have become because of it. Has the experience produced greater humility, deeper charity, greater patience, more honesty, or increased forgiveness? Or has it produced arrogance, superiority, hostility, manipulation, spiritual pride, or division? Psychology studies behavior. Theology studies holiness. Remarkably, both traditions often arrive at similar practical observations. A religious experience that consistently produces compassion is psychologically healthier than one producing paranoia or hatred. Thus, discernment becomes interdisciplinary. Psychology contributes observations about cognition, emotion, personality, and functioning. Theology contributes revelation, doctrine, ecclesial wisdom. Together, they present two opposite mistakes: reducing every spiritual experience to illness, or accepting every unusual experience as divine. One of the greatest misunderstandings today concerns the relationship between spiritual direction and psychotherapy. Many people assume they are interchangeable, but they are not. They overlap, but their purposes differ. Spiritual direction focuses primarily upon the person's relationship with God. Its questions include: how is God working in my life? How should I pray? What is my vocation? How do I discern God's will? Or what movements of consolation and desolation am I experiencing? The spiritual director accompanies the directee towards deeper fidelity to grace. Notice, spiritual direction presumes faith and asks theological question. Psychotherapy asks something different. It addresses trauma, depression, anxiety, personality, emotional regulation, cognition, family system, attachment, relationships, behavioral change. Its goal is psychological healing and healthy functioning. Clinical psychologists, counselors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists undergo extensive psychological professional formation precisely because these issues involve specialized knowledge. Now, notice something important. A person may simultaneously need both. Consider a seminarian who experiences panic attacks during prayer. The panic attacks may arise from childhood trauma. Psychotherapy addresses trauma. Spiritual direction accompanies the seminarian in prayer. Neither replaces the other. Likewise, a student may experience depression after the death of a parent. A therapist assists emotional healing. A spiritual director helps interpret suffering within the horizon of faith. Neither profession should pretend competence where it lacks training. A spiritual director should never attempt psychotherapy without clinical preparation. Likewise, a therapist should not automatically assume authority in theological discernment. The healthiest approach is collaboration. Modern pastoral psychology increasingly emphasizes interdisciplinary cooperation. The psychologist respects the person's spirituality. The spiritual director respects psychological science. Both ultimately seeks the flourishing of the same person. This reflects Catholic understanding of grace and nature. Grace does not destroy nature, neither does psychology eliminate grace. The person remains simultaneously psychological, social, embodied, moral, and spiritual. Good care, therefore, requires humility among professionals. Sometimes the most loving response is referral. Recognizing one's limits in is itself an act of charity. So, this is a Catholic framework for evaluating religious experience, and I'd like to skip it because it's already too theological, and it will be followed by an integrative comparison of major thinkers that we've looked at and that we have considered, and also one more slide on the application to Catholic higher education. This is, in the first place, a study of HAU, philosophy and psychology and spirituality. Why does all of these matter for Catholic universities? The answer is simple. Because Catholic higher education forms whole persons. Students today face unprecedented psychological and spiritual challenges. Many experience anxiety, loneliness, depression, identity confusion, vocational uncertainty, grief, moral conflict, digital distraction, religious doubt, loss of meaning. No single discipline can adequately address all these realities. Psychology alone cannot answer every spiritual question. Theology alone should not attempt to diagnose every mental illness. Catholic education, therefore, calls for integration. A university becomes a place where psychology and theology meet in service of the human person. Professors should cultivate critical thinking. Campus ministers accompany faith. Guidance counselor provide psychological support. Chaplains celebrate the sacraments. SDs foster discernment. Clinical professionals address emotional suffering. Faculty integrate faith and reason within academic disciplines. Together, they create an educational community where students encounter not fragmented services, but an integrated vision of human flourishing. This vision reflects Ex Corde Ecclesiae, which describes the Catholic University as a place where all knowledge is united in the search for truth. The psychology of religion, therefore, has practical implications far beyond the classroom. It shapes counseling, formation, education, ministry, healthcare, leadership, research. Ultimately, the goal is neither merely psychological adjustment nor merely religious observance. The goal is the flourishing of the whole human person, a person who is intellectually honest, psychologically healthy, spiritually mature, morally responsible, and open to God's grace. That is the deepest point of this course. Psychology helps us understand how human beings experience faith. Theology reveals the one toward whom faith ultimately leads. When these two disciplines remain in respectful dialogue, they enrich one another and serve the dignity of the human person more fully than either could do alone. As we reach the conclusion of this week's lecture, we move from theory to institutional practice. Everything we have studied, from William James to Kenneth Pargament, raises a fundamental educational question. What kind of university forms not merely competent professionals, but mature human beings? This slide answers that question by presenting 5 questions that every Catholic university should intentionally create space to ask. These are not simply academic questions, but questions of formation. The first asks, what kind of persons am I becoming? Notice that this question is different from asking, what career will I have? Modern education often emphasizes competence. Students are trained to become engineers, lawyers, physicians, psychologists, administrators, or teachers. Catholic education certainly values excellence, but excellence without character can become dangerous. Psychology reminds us that identity develops throughout life. Christianity asks whether that identity is gradually being conformed to Christ. Thus, formation is not simply acquiring knowledge, formation is becoming a particular kind of person. The second asks, what is worthy of my life? Frankl asks the deepest human motivation, or argued that the deepest human motivation is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Catholic education expands this further. Not everything meaningful is equally worthy. A person may devote an entire life to wealth, fame, or prestige. The question is whether those goals deserve one's life. Christianity ultimately answers that human life finds its fulfillment in truth, charity, holiness, and communion with God. The third question asks, how do my gifts become service? So talent is never merely private. Every intellectual gift, artistic ability, scientific discoveries, or professional competence becomes authentic only when placed at the service of others. This is why Catholic universities speak constantly of service learning, social responsibility, mission, or community engagement. Knowledge reaches its fulfillment when it becomes charity. The fourth question asks, where is God in my suffering? Notice carefully, the question is not why did God make me suffer? Instead, how is God present even there? Throughout this course, we have seen that suffering may become the occasion for conversion, deeper prayer, solidarity, compassion, and hope. Pastoral psychology teaches us not to answer suffering too quickly. Theology teaches us that God enters suffering through the cross. Finally, the fifth question asks, how should knowledge transforms responsibility? Knowledge is never morally neutral. AI, genetics, public administration, medicine, engineering, psychology, every discipline eventually raises ethical questions. Catholic education insists that intellectual formation must always include moral responsibility. Notice at the bottom of the slide, the sentence, integral formation demands collaboration among everyone. Why? Because no single discipline forms the whole person. Psychology contributes insight. Theology contributes revelation. Education cultivates freedom. Pastoral ministry accompanies vocation. Together, they help students become not merely successful professionals, but holy, responsible, and compassionate persons. Let's look at some questions for you to discuss, but we can skip that. A case study about a doctoral student, and of course, many more. But let us end with this concluding slide. Please go through the questions and the cases. Huh? So, mediation is not reduction. This summarizes the entire intellectual movement of week 3. Of course, week 4 is tomorrow. Well, today, because if you will watch this on Saturday and I'm recording it tonight. Its central statement deserves careful attention. To say that an experience has psychological dimension does not mean it is only psychological. This sentence addresses one of the greatest misunderstandings surrounding psychology and religion. Throughout history, people have feared that if psychology explains religious experience, faith disappears. The Course has shown otherwise. Prayer involves attention, conversion involves identity, mysticism involves cognition, faith involves attachment, religion involves coping. None of these observations disproves God. They simply describe how human beings receive and respond to grace. The task is not to separate spirituality from human nature. Instead, it is to discern the relationship carefully. This has been our method throughout the course. William James respected experience. Freud challenged naivete. Jung emphasized symbolism. Frankl highlighted meaning. Risotto explored God's representations. Kapp interpreted narrative. Pargament studied religious scoping. The church receives these insights critically. Psychology contributes empirical understanding. Theology contributes revelation. Neither discipline should dominate the other. The final paragraph also prepares us for week 4. Week 3 has focused upon individual religious experience. Week 4 will now move into the institutional setting of integral human formation, examining Catholic education through documents as Gravissimum Educationis, Ex Corde Ecclesiae, Veritatis Gaudium, Augustine, Newman, Maritain, and contemporary theories of formation. Thus, the movement of the course continues naturally. The human person, week 1, human development, week 2, religious experience, week 3, and institutional formation, week 4. We also present some required readings for you to consider. This will help you understand what's going on in the text if you haven't even checked them. And this is to basically clarify that the central insight is that the psychology of religion does not attempt to explain God. It seeks to understand how human beings encounter, interpret, resist, respond to, and are transformed by what they believe to be the living God. The distinction preserves both scientific integrity and theological depth, making possible a genuine Catholic psychology of religious experience. Thank you very much for your attention.